This is theme 2, deontological ethics. We're looking at natural law, and this is the final section of the natural law topic. We've looked at Finis and how he wants to develop from that traditional Thomist natural law into something that is more suited to modern Western liberal society. He was jurisprudence, and we're now going to move on to Bernard Hoose, who is exploring something called proportionalism. We're looking at proportionalism. We need to start with some basic concepts. Proportionalism is a principle which requires a deontological system, in other words, a rule-based system, and the stricter that rule-based system is, the more attractive proportionalism is to it. The basic principle of proportionalism is looking at when it may be appropriate to break those rules. It's probably worth starting then with an absolutist deontological system. That's Immanuel Kant, not in the syllabus, but worth knowing something about. So with Kant, he has things called categorical imperatives, one of which is never lie. And when Kant says never, he really does mean never, never under any circumstances at all lie. And to show how much he meant this, he wrote an essay called The Supposed Right to Lie from Altruistic Motives. Very simple scenario. A opens his door and friend B asks if he can hide in the house. B's being chased by C, who wants to kill him. B goes into the house to hide. A opens the door again later, and C asks him, is B hiding in your house? Well, C is the one who wants to kill B, but A says yes. Well, you might want to think about what's wrong with this answer, and the vast majority of people would say there is something wrong with it, because what you're doing, you're balancing two issues. You're balancing lying, which is wrong, but you're also balancing on the other side that somebody's going to die. Most people would then work out that although you really don't want people lying, lying is of lesser importance than death. Another illustration to just give us a feel for this concept of proportionalism, proportionality, the proportionalist position. This image is an incident from what were known as the Cod Wars, and this was a clash between the Icelandic and Royal Navy in 76. The key issue here is this is Britain versus Iceland, and you've got this Royal Navy frigate, which is a sort of, as I understand it, a sort of medium small warship from the British Navy, and you've got this Icelandic vessel which potentially is the biggest ship in the Icelandic Navy. At the same time as this was going on, Britain had the capacity, if it wanted to, had this V-bomber fleet. These were the nuclear equipped bombers, and so the question is, why did Britain not just unleash its nuclear fleet against Iceland? Now, the fairly obvious answer to that is, well, it was a bit of a tussle between two nations over fish. You don't nuke a country just over fish. And the crucial answer to why that word that you'd use then, you'd almost certainly say, well, it's just out of proportion to launch the V-bomber fleet against Iceland because of a dispute over fishing for cod. Another very important concept when we're looking at natural law is the concept of the law of double effect. And there's an element whereby proportionalism was to try and move away from just using the law of double effect, not to completely reject it, but to see its limitations and to find another way through the difficulties. Law of double effect is a way of dealing with some of these difficulties. We're going to look at two scenarios, and the first one of these is this is in the realms of euthanasia. So the first one, we've got patient A, final stages of terminal cancer on palliative care. Dr. B then describes an increase in dosage of morphine to control pain, very standard stuff. And as she prescribes the dose, she looks in her book and notices this is a fatal dose, and she administers the drug anyway. Patient B is tired of life, wishes to die. So this is a euthanasia clinic concept, so it's clearly not in the UK, and she's gone there to end her life. And Dr. C, note this is the wording here is pretty much the same as the first scenario. Dr. C prescribes a dose of a drug. As she notes from her book that this is a fatal dose, she administers the drug. Now, the key issue here is to try and look at what is the difference between those two. And the difference is intention. And intention is an absolutely central concept that we will come back to. And the way the law of double effect works is to say that those are different because the intention in the two different cases is significantly different. In the first one, the intention of Dr. B is pain control, and the intention of Dr. C is to kill the patient. And the way to think that one through is say, well, okay, well, let's have a look if the day after that, so this is day 2, Dr. B does the rounds of the hospice, goes into patient A's room, and patient A is still there. So what does Dr. B think? Does Dr. B think that she has failed? Or does Dr. B simply note that, yes, patient A, pain control is on track, and therefore she says that was successful? Oh, probably then just repeat the process and either increase or continue the dosage of morphine the same, which of course is still a fatal dose. If Dr. C, however, went into the room in the euthanasia clinic and patient B is still alive, then Dr. C would consider that she had failed because that was not even remotely what was supposed to happen. And moving for the next illustration into abortion, and this is how to deal with an ectopic pregnancy. Just make sure you've got the basics. Look at the picture. Normal pregnancy, fertilized ovum implants on the uterus wall. Ectopic pregnancy, fertilized ovum gets stuck in the fallopian tube and will grow there. To state the completely obvious, if the embryo then continues growing, then ultimately the mother will die, and there's no possible way of that embryo developing into a healthy baby that can be born. Just simply not possible. The way that can be dealt with under Roman Catholic natural law is what in fact was the standard procedure, used to be, was to cut out the fallopian tube that's got the growing embryo in it. That was never an issue for Roman Catholic natural law because the surgeon could say, well, what are you doing? And the surgeon would say, I am removing the fallopian tube. That's the intention. There's an unintended byproduct that, of course, it's going to kill the growing embryo. But doesn't matter because that's not the intention. We're going to look later about the concept of casuistry and intellectual acrobatics and just playing semantic games. And that's the problem here, that most people would say, but the only reason you are removing the fallopian tube in the first place is because you've got this growing embryo, so don't pretend that that's got nothing to do with it. But law of double effect it's a very strict legalistic approach, which is very much that old style Roman Catholic natural law approach. Law of double effect is incredibly important, therefore I am removing the fallopian tube. Now this became more significant when in fact new procedures came along, which from memory was sometime in the 70s or 80s, which in fact was a bit more sophisticated and enabled the surgeons to then just remove the growing embryo. And so it removed the growing embryo, leaving the fallopian tube intact and functioning. But of course then you've got the problem that what are the medical team doing? The medical team are removing the growing embryo. Let's use Roman Catholic natural law language. What are they doing? They are killing the baby in order to save the woman's life. That's a different concept if you are taking that strict Roman Catholic natural law approach. Old style procedure, I am removing the fallopian tube, and an unintended byproduct is killing the baby. I'm using that language because that would be fitting with Roman Catholic natural law. You can do that, you can remove the fallopian tube. You've got problems with the modern procedure because your intention is to kill the baby. Now we get into the details of proportionalism, how it works within Roman Catholic natural law, and more specifically how Hoose has explored this. The starting point really is the cultural shifts of the 1960s in Western culture. There was a concern really that as culture shifted, the gap between the liberalising influence of those 60s movements, the gap between that and traditional Roman Catholic teaching was growing, and something needed to be done about it because essentially people were ignoring the Roman Catholic teaching because they thought it was too strict. Hoose's book, the key one for this course, the one that's referenced, is his 1987 book, Proportionalism, the American Debate and its European Roots. It's a survey of proportionalism, it's a survey of the way the debate was being conducted. No great surprise really that it was condemned, proportionalism was condemned by the Roman Catholic Church. This is Pope John Paul II, the encyclical Veritatis Splendor, 1993. And the essence of it was that proportionalism looked as if it was denying that any action can in and of itself be intrinsically evil. It looked as if it was going in the direction of absolutely anything at all goes if the situation demands it. One of the things that the proportionalists were concerned to do was show that this was not some brand new approach, that in fact it was within the natural law tradition. And so needless to say, they went back to Aquinas and found that what's now known as proportionalism was latent in Aquinas, and he gave the example, it's a pretty classic one really. A starving man was able to break the secondary precept of stealing, and so here's the quote from Aquinas, really just saying that if you're starving, then you can take somebody else's property. It gets more confusing because Aquinas was then not consistent really the challenge was that he wasn't consistent, because Aquinas argued that it's not lawful to lie to save someone from death. So Aquinas seemed to go with the idea that you couldn't balance up lying and death and say that death was more significant and therefore you were allowed to lie. Modern proportionalists would tend to argue, and this would be where they would work from Aquinas onwards, to say if it's acceptable to steal in order to save yourself from starvation, it makes little sense to prohibit lying in order to save someone's life. So this is where it gets off the ground as a discussion within natural law, and not just simply something from outside it. Fletcher's situation ethics would be just outside that. It's not really bothered with the laws. But this is a discussion within. They're trying to stay within that Thomist tradition. And Hoose here, what the proportionalists have done is point out the inconsistency and invalidity of Aquinas when he says stealing to save yourself from starvation is okay, lying to save someone's life isn't. Okay, looking then at how proportionalism actually works. The main issue with proportionalism is that those rules which are there stay in place. This is not dispensing with the rules. It's not Fletcher's situation ethics where you've just got some vague guiding principles and you wander through life just doing the most loving thing in the situation. No, proportionalism is definitely within that natural law, that deontological system which is rule-based, and the rules are going to stand. You can't just get rid of them for no particular reason. You've got to have a proportionate reason. You've got to have a really significant reason to break the rules. And so abortion is wrong. That's where the proportionalists would start. Abortion is wrong, and that rule should always be followed, because it breaks the primary precept of reproduction, unless, and it's that unless which is central to the proportionalist position, unless there is a proportionate reason to abort the fetus. And so when you're balancing up that in this particular situation, the law doesn't look right, and so what you would say is, standard one, mother's life versus fetus, you go with mother, particularly if the fetus isn't going to live anyway. That ectopic pregnancy situation, that's one where the proportionate reason, they both die, or just the I'll use the word baby, that natural law language, either the baby dies or they both die. That is a proportionate reason to then abort the fetus. So the deontological moral laws then providing this firm, solid moral guidance which should never be ignored unless. So this isn't Kant. You've got that, just about, you've got that escape clause which enables you to deal with those extreme and unique situations which give you then a proportionate reason to break the law. This ability within proportionalism enables people to work within a natural law approach, but also deal with the unusual, the serious, the extreme, that quite honestly anybody who knows anything about human life realises that rules are just simply not designed for. And that's the point at which you can then go in and use your human judgment, your wisdom, to make that balance, to work out proportionally which is the least bad option, which of these will generate the least evil. Now, one of the things that this does is it removes the need to work with double effect. So therefore would allow the removal of the fertilised ovum growing in a fallopian tube. Double effect, of course, requires that the fallopian tube itself is removed. And many consider then that if you're using double effect, then really what you're doing, you're just playing with words. You're failing to engage with the human reality of the situation. And so the followers of proportionalism consider that it's a more honest, it's a more human, it's a much wiser way of working. One of the components that's very important within proportionalism and is focused on very much is the intention. And so it's a very human-based model. It's that what is the intention of the moral agent concerned? If you contrast it with another teleological system, or a purely teleological system of utilitarianism, that has absolutely no interest whatsoever in intention. You just simply calculate outcomes and identify that which produces greatest happiness for the greatest number. If you ignore intention of the moral agent, then that leaves only, we're going to use some technical terms here which we need to have a look at. Without intention, it just leaves simply the ontic, the pre-moral, the physical evil within the act, and ignores its morality. Ontic evil, ontic then, it's a term from Roman Catholic moral theology, comes from Aquinas, and it goes back to the fall narrative, the concept of original sin. So ontic evil is that sin which permeates everything in the entire universe and means that there's just this lack of perfection in the created order and in human social structures. And so ontic evil then would include natural disasters, accidental harm or damage, in fact the negative effects of all human actions, including those whose intent was good, because things just don't work out as we would rather like them to because of the fall. We're looking here at evil and suffering not caused by any intention. It's not directly intended. It's just about the way the universe is, that despite all our efforts, all our intentions to avoid evil, suffering still happens. That original sin concept, evil, is inherent in the human condition. If we see a proportionate reason, we're going to tolerate evil. So that's evil which is always there. So in other words, man cuts human flesh with knife. What we're bothered about is the reason for this. The effects of surgery, then, you're not going to have surgery without pain and discomfort, but the negative effect of that, or the ontic evil, the negative, the pain which will result from that cutting of the flesh, stitching up again, or whatever else has happened, that will be accepted, that inbuilt, we'll use the word evil, within that, because it's preferred to the greater harm of disease or even death without the treatment. So it's the intention that gives an action its morality, and this is something that justification proportionalists focus on very much, that whether that cutting the human flesh with a knife is good or bad is entirely about the intention. Now what this means is that Hoose considers that there cannot be any acts that are intrinsically in and of themselves evil. This is what brings proportionalism into conflict with the Vatican. So you can't have the physical act of abortion is not intrinsically evil. We can only identify whether an abortion is morally right or wrong by looking at the situation, the intention of the moral agent. It's only when we look at a situation in its totality, the actions, the intentions of the moral agent, that we can really work out whether something is a good or bad action. Therefore, when considering the morality of a particular situation, the proportionalist considers what is called the proportion of value to disvalue in the potential actions carried out. It's fairly straightforward, this one. Value, that's all the reasons why the action to be carried out may be justified in terms of its own unique moral situation, positive intentions, precepts upheld, etc. And the disvalue is then the opposite of that. So what you're doing there is you are weighing up that idea of weighing the value and the disvalue included with any particular act. That's not utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is simply calculating the happiness and pain. This is a wider bringing in these terms of value and disvalue, much wider than just happiness and pain. Proportionalists draw a distinction between right acts and good acts. So good act is one that follows the moral deontological rules. Those rules tell us what is good. And of course, most of the time you are supposed to act in that way. That's just how you live. Now, the whole point of proportionalism is that it kicks in at the point when what is clearly a good act really looks as if it's not going to be the correct course of action. And don't forget, this is only relevant in exceptional circumstances. This isn't a casual you can just choose not to do the good act whenever you want. So you get into those exceptional circumstances, and at that point you might find that the right act is one which now breaks those deontological rules which we have got. Now, this is a very important distinction, because the fact that you have done it does not make it good. And so therefore the language you would use of the action that you choose to perform is the lesser of two evils, is a fairly standard way of putting it. My personal preference is to describe it as the least bad action. And so if you're in one of those really exceptional situations, it is quite possible that you only have in front of you pretty bad stuff. And so you've got to decide out of all that bad which one you are going to choose. Now, by using that language, what you are doing is you are preserving the goodness of the particular rule. And so therefore, if you lie in some exceptional circumstances, standard one would be, World War II context, Nazi occupied Europe, you're hiding Jews in your attic, SS, knock on the door, are you hiding Jews in your attic? Now, in that case, what you do is you lie. Proportionalist would say you lie. Lying does not become good. Lying in that very extreme context may be right. Proportionalism would say, yeah, actually, here's a point where you don't obey the law. You don't stay with the good. The good, quite honestly, is not, goodness is not really open to you. What you've got is a whole stack of bad options, of bad outcomes as you predict the future. And so what you do, you choose to tell the lie, because in that specific and extreme context, lying is the right act. It is not, however, a good act. It remains a bad act, but in that context, it is the right act